Hello, my name is Cody Havard, and I am with the Kimmons Wilson School at the University of Memphis. And I'm going to talk about a presentation and a project I did with Carissa Baker, Daniel Wan, and Frederick Grieve called When the Magic Closes, examining how Disney fans cope with theme park and resort closures amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And a little bit of background on where this project came from starts with the being a fan of Disney class that I teach through the Honors College at the University of Memphis. And one portion of that class, or one feature of that class, I would have people Skype in virtually visit with the classes during the semesters, and people would talk about their fandom or having worked with the company or doing various projects Disney related. And when the pandemic sent everyone remote, I had a few of these visits lined up, and we really started talking about, is there a way that we could do this? Maybe just do it one-on-one and record it, post the video for the students to be able to watch, because we had always recorded the videos so that future students could watch, and anyone interested could watch those and listen to those. And so I did one of those interviews, and then it kind of gave me the idea that we could do more of these. It wasn't contingent on availability during class periods. We could do as many as needed, as many as we wanted to. And then through those conversations is really where I started talking to people about what was currently going on, and what did it feel like that the parks were closed, the resorts were closed. And then as we got further into summer 2020, and it got closer to the Orlando parks opening back up, talking to people about what does that look like, and what's the excitement around it, and what do you think is going to come from that. And so that led me into, or gave me the idea for the formal study, and asking people how they coped with the Disney parks and resorts being closed, and some of the things they did to be able to cope with that, and some of the ways that they helped pass the time and keep that Disney magic going for them. And so that's what gave us the idea for the formal study. A little bit more on what fandom is. There are fandom studies in various areas of um, of brands. If you're looking at sports, if you're looking at theme parks, if you're looking at television or movies or comics, there are fandom studies that cover a lot of these different areas. And one thing that's pretty consistent with fandom is it creates this diversion for people. And the diversion is important because it allows someone to whether spend 2 or 3 hours in this suspended animation, or area where they're able to not kind of pay attention to everything else going on. They can instead unplug and become engaged with something that they're really interested in, and that's a very important aspect of fandom. And within the Disney space, if you will, visiting the parks and resorts represents a very important diversion for a lot of people, and a point of attachment for a lot of people. Yes, for the especially or for the people who get to visit once every few years, or maybe once in a lifetime, to those people who live near the parks, the amount of diversion that they are offered by being able to attend and step foot in the parks is very important to these individuals, and very important to everyone moving forward who is a fan of the Disney brand. So when the pandemic sent everyone remote, and closures bounded, then it really took away that diversion that a lot of us feel, that we're able to um, see something live, you're able to go to a theater, you're able to go to a theme park. And for fans of Disney, not being able to go to the theme parks and not being able to see the resorts, and as some people talked about, seeing those parks and resorts essentially empty was a very odd feeling. And so some of the things that we talked about in the study, here are four of the research questions that we covered. One was to kind of set the stage and see how people are socialized into their Disney fandom and how they engage with the Disney Parks and Resorts brand. And as part of that, we did talk about comparison to Universal and some other theme parks, and where Disney sits and everything, and along with the societal impact of the Disney brand. And then we really got into what happened once the parks were closed. So the second research question was, um, how did the closures and extended closures impact fans and consumers? The third research question, we talked about how the phased reopenings and the planned reopenings of the Disney parks and resorts, how people reacted to those. And then the fourth research question that we'll touch on in this presentation is, how did the closures amid the COVID-19 pandemic impact fans and consumer perceptions of the Walt Disney Company and their parks and resorts in the United States and abroad? So kind of this overall broader perspective look at it. And so what we did as far as methods is, 22 people were recruited by responding to a message placed on social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. And these are self-identified Disney fans. And we purposely chose to collect information or to um, recruit participants using social media so that we could tap into that Disney fandom, and we could tap into, or we could find people who already identified as Disney fans. And so were more likely experiencing some of that loss of diversion from Disney. And in some cases, maybe a greater amount of loss because the Disney parks were closed than maybe your general attendee or somebody who's not able to attend as frequently. Participants then responded to a series of open questions on Qualtrics, and the reason we did that is we wanted to provide people the platform where they could answer questions in as much depth as they desired. Respondents typically took between 10 to 15 minutes to complete the questions, and then we'll move on to the four major findings that we'll touch on here. Is we talked about socialization and the impact of the Disney parks and resorts brand. Then fan reactions and coping mechanisms to the parks and resorts closures, the societal impact of those closures, and then the phased reopenings of the parks and resorts. So when we look at socialization and impact, and again, these questions were asked to sort of give us a baseline comparison. So to see where people were going and how identified they were with the brand, and also to allow the individual participants to see how identified they were with the brand, um, leading into their discussion of how important the parks and resorts are to them amid the closures. And so people talked about their introduction to the brand, and they were introduced by family. And here are a few comments or a few quotes from that. Um, their introduction by family or close acquaintances is very common with what we see in other areas of fandom as well. Same as the ties to family throughout their lifetime. You could see Carolyn commented, "My father is a huge Disney fan, and that passion is carried down to me and my children." So people sharing the passion that their parents had for the brand, and then encompassing it themselves and feeling so identified with it that they pass it on to their children as well, because they have such strong memories of joy and feelings of joy around that. And people also talked about the importance of the diversion. Many said it's my happy place. It's my escape from reality, my stress reliever, my return to childhood simplicity. And a lot of participants said that over and over again, that this diversion, this suspension of reality is what is needed, especially in times. And we'll get into what that suspension of reality, the importance of that when we talk about more of the closures. And a word that kept coming up over and over again was this word magic. And it's one of those that I think, being a fan of Disney, you understand what people refer to as when they say magic. Um, that it's just this feeling that you get when you step into the parks, and you see the characters, or you're there and you see people enjoying what you are enjoying. And it would be similar to the experience fans would feel in other areas as well. So then, when we asked fans about their reactions and coping mechanisms, people gave various answers, but a lot of people talked about it being the right decision. And the right decision because people were, or the company was putting safety over money. And these questions were asked during the summer, before some of the more recent developments, from the fall, but the unfortunate developments from the fall. But people talked about this amount of trust. They're putting their employees before their revenue, and the importance placed in that, and placed in that idea that the company is not only looking out for themselves, they're looking out for us as well. And some fans even had this urge to protect the Disney brand. So I'll read this quote from Samantha. She said, "I think it's sad, but I also think it's for the best. I feared people would go and get COVID and then try to sue Disney for getting it there, and it would cause a longer delay in going to the parks." And she was not alone in talking about this idea of protecting the brand, protecting Disney, which I think is really, really interesting, that there's so much identity and affinity for the brand that fans want to protect that brand. And that shows a level of brand equity and brand strength that Disney and the Walt Disney Company has, and the amount of identification people have with that brand. And then when we talked about coping mechanisms, people said from planning future vacations, saving to planning future, or saving money for future vacations, to watching Disney content, whether that was on the streaming platform Disney Plus, or whether that was uh, user provided content or produced content on Facebook and YouTube. And people also talked about um, interacting with others online, and the ways that they would kind of share stories online to help pass the time and keep them engaged with the Disney brand and that Disney magic. Then we also looked at the societal impact of closures, and the importance of that loss of diversion came up again. And people talking about how difficult it was that that diversion was taken away, especially in a time where people were experiencing something very traumatic and needing that diversion. And at that time, that diversion cannot be offered in a safe and healthy manner. People also talked about the impact on employees and the economy, both in Southern California and in Orlando. When you look at um, the amount of people who are not able to work because the parks and resorts were closed, the impact on the local economies, not just the parks and resorts and Disney Springs and those entities, but the entities around them, and the negative impact on that really was made for a difficult time for the areas around the parks. And other people talked about Disney closing really showed how serious the situation was and how serious people should be taking the pandemic. And that again kind of goes back to this idea that Disney is looking out for everyone, and at the same time, Disney is this major brand that people have a lot of respect for. So if Disney is making a decision to do this, then it obviously is in the best interest of their customers, and other people should heed those warnings as well. Now, when we talked about reopening and we asked people about the reopening, we heard time and time again that people have confidence in Disney, that they are going to handle it the best they can in a changing environment, and they are going to handle the health and safety of their cast members and of their guests. That's going to be of the utmost importance to Disney and to the brand. Someone they talked about the social distancing and everything, and someone did say, I have a high degree of trust in the company, but I have a low degree of trust in the customers. And so that's something that definitely did come into play, that this idea that we trust the brand, um, but then it's also important to the brand that they monitor the guests who are around us. And that's a really interesting aspect of that. Sometimes you have something that the brand can do, or a company can do to um, their best detail, and but what other people do is also a reflection of that brand. And so the brand has to control for that as well. And they have to be looking out for um, things that are going to make their consumers and their guests uncomfortable. And then Zip summed it up saying they won't do it if reopening will hurt their brand or damage their attendance. So there was that basis of reality as well, that this is a major brand, this is a major company. They are making decisions that are going to be in the best interest of everyone involved, including the reality of their brand and protecting their brand. So I think important lessons and implications that come from this for practitioners is that importance of trust, confidence, and brand equity cannot be understated. People talk about how important it is to have trust in a brand, and how you work to build that equity and you build that confidence, and how singular events or events that combine together can really hurt that confidence or that trust in a brand, and how detrimental that can be. And that kind of bared out with people talking about how much confidence and trust they had with the Disney brand. So when Disney told them that, they're reopening and here's the things we're going to do in this reopening process, people really had trust in that, because the company has painstakingly built that trust and confidence over a long period of time. Another important implication for practitioners is what the public perceives as your ability to handle a crisis is very, very important. And the way that you communicate, the way that you are looking out for safety, the steps that you're taking as we move into a new normal is very, very important. Another important implication is the way that you can engage with consumers and fans. Obviously, people couldn't go to the parks and resorts. Um, and so during that time, how the company still was able to engage with their consumers and their fans was extremely important in keeping those people interested in the brand, keeping them interested in the idea of returning to those parks when they open again. And it is it's unique that Disney, being the brand that they are, has a streaming service like Disney Plus. But there are also other ways that the company was able to engage with their consumers and fans and keep them interested, and into the keep them in the fold. And then also the way a company or a brand plans for the new normal, because we don't know what is going to happen moving forward. And so, how do we plan for this new normal? And it's extremely important that brands, practitioners, and researchers know or try to better understand how people are going to feel moving into that new normal, and where's the confidence level going to be, and the comfort level, where is that going to come from? Um, in addition to understanding the new normal from a researcher's perspective, also understanding how fans and consumers engage with brands is very, very important. And this case study of the Disney brand really gives a great glimpse into those practices. Now, moving forward, there needs to be continued investigation into the reopenings of the parks and into what the new normal will look like. There's also the caveat that this was a case study. Every brand is different. Disney is very, very different because they have the multiple points of attachment that maybe some other brands don't. However, um, or therefore, it's important to understand the differences amongst brands and what each brand can offer to their consumers and how they can keep them engaged. And then the overall goal of understanding what it means to be a fan of Disney, and looking at things like what we discuss in the class and what is discussed on the podcast that goes along with the class are all very, very important. And so here's my contact information. The YouTube link will send you to the discussions and guest visits from the Being a Fan of Disney class, and also the podcast link sends you to that podcast of those lectures and that information as well. And so with that, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.